I'll immediately be like, who said that? You know what I mean? So that's a little about me.
All right, thank you all so much for introducing yourselves. We're gonna dive right in. So we really want to start off the conversation with talking about generative AI and large language and machine learning. So we want to pass that over to our instructors. So you can just give your take on that topic, and we'll proceed from there.
Awesome, thanks, Chelsea. So these days, we use the term AI, artificial intelligence, pretty freely, particularly as we've added ChatGPT into our lives and everyone's trying to promote their own AI service. AI stands for artificial intelligence, and as Jelly mentioned, artificial intelligence is really a form of machine learning, so it's deeply embedded inside of data science. These days, though, frequently when we are discussing AI tools and products, we are specifically thinking of, as Chelsea mentioned, two specific areas of AI. The first of those being generative AI, and the second of those being large language models. Generative AI are things that you might have seen, like that will take a prompt and go ahead and turn that into like some form of form of outcome. Most of like the more popular examples are things like Stable Diffusion or Midjourney, where you give it a prompt like, give me a photo of like a cat riding a bicycle with a top hat, and it like gives you out a picture of a cat riding a bicycle wearing a top hat. There are other examples of this. One of the other ones that is really popular is Adobe's generative AI, built directly into Photoshop, that can go ahead and like expand a picture out beyond the edges of it originally existing. And then the other one of these, let me make sure. The other part of generative AI is not specifically like image or related. It is also included as part of like ChatGPT. So generative AI can also generate text, video, audio based on a user prompt, and then a large language model, which is what we are talking about when we discuss things like ChatGPT or Google Bard, are focused on generating text only. And that's the like primary things that we're discussing when these days we are referring to AI. There are lots of other implementations of AI, and I am less of an expert of this than probably my other two instructors here. So if they have other things to add to that definition, I would pass it back to them.
No, I think you explained it pretty well, Oli. I mean, the first thing that came to my mind is when you said a cat riding a bicycle with a top hat. I'm like, is it going to be biased and only choose orange cats? So now I want to know, right? Like, is it biased against the type of cat? But that's just where my mind immediately goes, right? But exactly what you said, like, machine learning came about first, right? And then once we decided to have these algorithms to help machines learn, whether it's predicting customer churn, predicting stock prices, whatever it may be, we have this deep learning. So AI is this subset of deep learning that has neural nets involved, right? So it's dealing with trying to mimic the human brain, so that way they can figure out their next state, reinforcement learning, or they can predict something else, right? And within AI, just as you mentioned, is generative AI, right? And so a lot of these models are black box, they're neural nets. And that's something that Cash talked about in his intro, about things that he's interested in, is demystifying the black box. So these algorithms have a lot of mystery, and we're going to talk about how those mysteries can okey doke us if we don't use them properly. But great.
Awesome. I don't have much more to say about like the definition of AI, unless Cash wanted to add anything to that great add-on from Jelly.
Sure. I mean, both of you really laid the foundations beautifully. I think the only thing I could add to provide any more context is kind of just like a playful new idea of thinking of AI, where like, you know, a lot of the contemporary thinking for AI kind of goes in almost two almost paradoxical directions, where one of them we already talked about, where it's like AI is very much a subset of deep learning and machine learning. And that's a lot of the ways we as techies like to think about it, especially like from more formal backgrounds in like mathematics and engineering, because you just keep getting deeper and deeper until you don't know what on earth you're looking at, right? But there's this other really interesting idea, I think, in AI, where AI also suddenly becomes all-encompassing too. Like when we're talking about machine learning and deep learning, usually what we're talking about is very, very specific types of rigid algorithms that serve very, very specific unilateral purposes, and super easily break when given a slightly different condition or something like that. You know what I mean? Like a image classifier could work really well against classifying dogs and cats, but you give it a panda and it has no idea, or you give it a GIF or something like that, it has no idea. We are almost entering this new age of artificial intelligence where a lot of the models aren't even, they're not just a subset, but they're also combining elements of other computer science and design thinking and artistry and other domains and fields in a much more assimilative way, which is, I think, why we've seen so many technologies like, ChatGPT and many of the, even like, I know for a while people were buzzing on about like the generative, I don't know if it was generative, but the music mimicry songs you'd see on YouTube and stuff like that were very AI driven, and just how bonkers crazy it is. I think that generation of AI is super interesting to think about, because it's like simultaneously both a really deep subset and something that inevitably everyone can kind of connect to, because it's almost half in the realm of tech and half out, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think this is a good segue about our thoughts as a panel about, will AI replace HI? HI meaning human intelligence, for those who don't know. This is a common question that we get, so I'll answer it last, and I'll probably pass it back over to Cash, even though he's been talking. And think about all of these good use cases that we said about AI, generating these models, solving business decisions, giving us audio files, creating music for us, creating art for us. Do you think that AI will replace HI?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question. And one that I've been thinking about for a long time too. I think, I mean, obviously it's kind of a cop out to say it depends, but I think there's an interesting subtext in there, where we've seen the ways that AI has started optimizing a lot of different, ways that people interact and work and stuff like that. And we're not just talking about the ways that GPT and current technologies work, but even as far back as, I'm sure we remember the age where like the advent of autonomous technologies for like the trucking industry and for supply chain and factories and stuff like that, and how there was a lot of buzz just 5-10 years ago in terms of like, hey, are we going to start seeing robots and machines take over jobs? And so I think really it comes down to how we define not just AI as a whole, but what specific technologies we build. Because I think that there's a capacity for AI to replace human operation, human operability, but human operability and human intelligence aren't quite the same thing, right? Like we're at a day and age where tech like GPT, tech like robot arms, tech like satellite imagery, every app on our phone at this point, they all serve to make our lives a little easier. And in some cases a lot easier, and that's all AI powered. I wouldn't say that's really replacing human intelligence, but there is a slippery slope in terms of, we hear about it all the time, and of course even here at Flatiron we talk about all the time, like how do we deal with tech like GPT, whether it helps or hinders parts of the learning process, stuff like that. And I think there's a lot of interesting discussion there, because I don't know if AI as a definition replaces human intelligence. I think it's in the way it's adapted and actually expressed, and that almost comes down to the individual. Really, I think it comes down to how it's talked about. You know what I mean? So, because I like to think of AI as on its own, it's not what replaces human intelligence. If we wanted to replace our thinking and stuff like that, we'll make that happen. But we also have the power to have it replace operability and stuff like that while still retaining creative freedom and flexibility, if that makes sense.
Yeah, Oli, your thoughts?
Yeah, I have been thinking about this in a couple different ways. I had an interesting conversation actually this past weekend with someone who teaches younger students. And I think one thing that I would bring as part of this discussion is that as much as human intelligence molds artificial intelligence as a way of like mimicking the way that the brain works, the new tools and technologies that we begin to use also mold the way that our human intelligence either retains or processes or like activates based on certain information. I was obviously taught in a very different generation than people who are in school now, but they're just like my parents before me had to go to the library to answer questions, and I got to go maybe to Google. The generation now growing up will use ChatGPT, and maybe that means that I retain less information because I know that Google will keep it for me, and maybe that means that the generations beyond me will go ahead and ask, we'll have a more seamless interconnection with artificial intelligence as a way to augment their own human intelligence. I would also like add to this discussion that I think as much as like some of the stuff that we've seen from ChatGPT being like the best answer and how surprising it can be, both in like the ability to support us and the cool, amazing things that it can do, despite it having like these inaccuracies or what they call hallucinations. What am I saying? I think there's a lot that we just don't know will happen with AI. Like I can't foresee what happens if AI gets to this point where it like can learn from itself, whether or not that is a good thing or a bad thing, and like whether that is potentially disastrous. And like connected to that discussion, I think is what happens with something like sentience or cognition, and what are our like definitions of something being a conscious being versus like an artificial intelligence. And again, that's much more of a philosophical question, but if you like are trying to define something as being sentient based on some like strict set of rules, and ChatGPT or generation of AI that comes like 5-10 years from now, do you give these machines, these tools, the validity of being like a sentient being? And I think that has other ethical implications as well as, and there's just a lot we don't know yet, because these things are going to drastically shift their own technologies as they improve and people like throw more stuff at them. What happens when we get quantum computing working at a mass level, and these things can just like zoom into light speed, and there's like less restrictions on them. So that's some of the things that I think about when it comes to human intelligence being replaced by artificial intelligence. And I'll pass it over to Jelly.
Yeah, so for the sake of time, I'm going to kind of be somewhat brief in my answer so we can get through an open Q&A for you all to ask us questions. But I think Thompson had a very important comment in the chat that I'm going to address as well. So yes, it's a very ambiguous question, right? When we're talking about replacement, I think a lot of people, when meeting with industry leaders across conferences, says, at one point we had an outhouse, right? And there was people that were making outhouses, and then somebody built a toilet. Right. So now, did it put the people who built outhouses out of work? Yes, it did, because now toilets are the new innovation. Right. And so we have been through these areas where innovations have depleted some jobs and have opened up other jobs, right? And so you mentioned Thompson as the role of prompt engineering. Prompt engineering is more of a skill set than it is an actual job. And I'm going to tell you why. From talking to industry professionals and Microsoft, Google, all of these other FANG companies, and even medium startup companies, they view prompt engineering now as creating a PowerPoint slide deck. Everybody needs to have it, right? It's a skill. Now, will the title and role prompt engineering be here 5-7 years from now? No, because creating prompts now is just one of those resume skills that you should just have underneath your tool belt, right? That you have the ability to engineer the correct prompts for the correct business use case, right? So when we're talking about replacement, it can't totally replace every human because human still needs to feed it these prompts, right? Based off of the use cases. So to your point, it's about what type of jobs will be replaced. So if you had a team of 10 people that used to create the design sets for movies, now there's an open AI software that can recreate the design set for you and probably only need 1 or 2 people making the prompts and doing QA. Right? But it's not that the whole team goes away, but the amount of people on that team will go away, right? And so, and later we'll share resources. And of course, those who already know me on LinkedIn, I did a whole industry professional poll about will it replace HI? And out of 100 responses, 89% of industry professionals said no, right? Because it costs money, right? So in the near future, a lot of businesses will not adopt these. These are very expensive models, right? So if they can go and get some type of analysis from a regular t-test or a regular machine learning model, they're going to still go down that route. It has security issues, so you're not going to see it a lot in healthcare and finance, right? So healthcare and finance are going to be more safe sectors that's not going to be as impacted in the near future as a more creative role, right? So all of those are good questions that you talked about, Thompson, as far as the prompt engineering, the actual replacement, exactly what will it replace, right? So I think of it as a new innovation. It's going to eliminate some of the automation and labor, but it's also going to open up more skill sets, such as creative thinking, prompt engineering, et cetera, like you said in the chat. All right, and I think we already talked about what we got excited in our introduction. So let's just go ahead and talk about the benefits of machine learning. So Cash, I'm gonna pop it back over to you again to talk real briefly about the benefits of machine learning.
Yeah, 100%. Thanks, Shelly. That honestly was probably one of the best explanations of the whole AI and autonomous job replacement things I've ever heard. Because it's a very hot question for obvious reasons. And yeah, I'll try to keep this brief because we did already touch upon this a little bit, but I'm happy to provide a little bit more context as well from that ML perspective. Because a lot of you are probably thinking as well from software engineering perspective, stuff like that. You know, how does an understanding of ML help inform, why AI is the way it is, right? And I think a lot of it just comes down to understanding that these systems, artificial intelligence, as it is now, as it's been over the last 10 years, and as it's going to be 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, 100 years from now, are very aggregated systems, right? They're built on the shoulders of computer science and machine learning and deep learning and statistics and discrete mathematics, right? And so a lot of these systems, there's an idea that like, oh, in order to build AI, you need to be an expert in mathematics and stats and computer programming and logic and hardware and all that. And I don't really think that's true nowadays. I think what's more accurate is the way that machine learning, for instance, works, where you have a system that's really, really, really well trained to do a specific task, one really, really specific task. There's an excellent, I'll actually link this video in the resources, excellent video by the content creator CGP Grey on YouTube called How Machines Learn. It's one of my favorite ML videos. And he describes akin to building a little robot that is really good at telling the difference between pictures of bees and the number 3. But you give it anything else, whether it's different types of data, whether it's a video of a bee, whether it's a text string, whether it's anything else, right? Any different type of data, right? Whether you give it a null character, it doesn't matter, it's going to break, or it's just not going to know what it's doing. You know what I mean? So, and when you think about AI is just systems that are built off of those, those building blocks, right? They may include deeper mathematics and deeper computer programming architectures and stuff like that, but the idea is still very similar, where you still have statistical models and you still have predictive models and stuff like that that are deeply embedded within artificial intelligence. Many of the models we work with today, technologies like ChatGPT, literally has it in the name GPT, a transformer model, which if anyone's experienced with introductory deep learning, you've probably heard of transformers as something that you can actually build. Like anyone here can build in code, right? So, or at least call in code and work with. So I think the real benefit to understanding and learning and grappling with machine learning as a learning block to better knowing how to work with AI is knowing AI's limitations, knowing how it exceeds limitations from the previous fields, from stats, from ML, stuff like that. But being aware of stuff like, ideas like how machine learning fails, right? One area that I neglected to mention in my intro of interest is the idea of machine learning security, or more plainly put, how to break ML, right? How to break AI. And a lot of that rides the wave of just understanding, hey, here's how a model works, so here's how it doesn't work. And if it can break a machine learning classifier or a regression model or anything like that, chances are good that you can break ChatGPT or technologies like that the same way or similar ways. And we've already seen, honestly, like in the past few years on the Twitterverse and stuff like that, examples, right? I think with ChatGPT, it's been most apparent where people would, I think for the biggest example was how people could emotionally overwhelm ChatGPT or other language learning models by giving emotionally context questions or stuff like that it didn't really know how to respond to as effectively as something very descriptive, right? That's something that machine learning and an understanding of can actually give you a better sense of, since it's a lot about what types of data you give it. You know what I mean? What actual data you train machine learning on. So obviously there's like so much more we could talk about in terms of like the roots of ML and how it builds up to AI. But I think one of the biggest takeaways that I would encourage looking into is just how a lot of the ways that ML works and how it doesn't work can evolve into a better understanding of how AI works and doesn't work for many of our contemporary and future use cases. And I'd love to hear what my my peers think of that as well.
I think that was a good trajectory going into the biases and the ethics around these algorithms, because you did mention about tuning the models and the data that it's being tuned on and things of that nature. And of course, Thompson also has a great point in the chat as well, talking about security issues around models, those that are run locally. When we're talking about model security, at least in this context, we're expecting that the model is going to be deployed, right? And it's going to have some end users, right? So we want to make sure that we take those models out of the local machine. So what are some security issues when you actually deploy out these models? I think one of the first models, forms of AI that we have seen before large language models have been chatbots, right? And recently now with a lot of the generative AI making chatbots, there's one chatbot where it'll give you back your credit card number. So that's not secure, right? So if you're interfacing with a chatbot and you're saying, hey, I have this problem with Amazon, can you help me? What are your keys, your primary keys and foreign keys? And the chatbot is spitting back out your credit card information. That's a bad use of AI, right? So having people in place to do what we call responsible AI, meaning once these models are deployed, to check the accuracy, check the security walls, put in what we call guardrails. And I see, Thompson, you also mentioned splintering, right? Making sure that the model is tuned to your use case. But once again, this costs money. I cannot express this enough, right? So when people are talking about AI replacements, AI has building these models costs money, tuning the models. Nobody is building these models anymore. There's no need. It's thousands of these out here, right? It's like the space race. So once you get a base foundational model, building on top of it to tune it to your use case before deploying it. And once you deploy it, check in as far as the accuracy, all of that great stuff. So that goes right into the bias, right? If you're just deploying a model and you're not checking its performance, the model will drift. And what we mean by that is that it will no longer perform well as what it originally performed when it was first deployed, right? So model drift is an issue. So how do you get the models to still give you accurate results? There are tons of resources out here. One is by NVIDIA. If you didn't invest in their stock like I didn't, shame, because we could all be rich right now. But pretty much they have AI guardrails where they always make sure that the model is staying within scope on certain guardrails, right? To help mitigate some of these inaccurate results. We talked a lot about hallucinations, how to get past hallucinations. It goes back to the same principle of garbage in, garbage out. So by Aakash saying things are built on machine learning, those principles are still applied to AI. If the data is bad, if the data is biased, if you don't have representative groups, the model will also perform this way. These models are only 40 to 60% accurate out the box. They have to be tuned, right? So making sure that we test the output, make sure that we still have those soft skills of critical and creative thinking. So here at Flatiron, in a lot of our programs, we don't just want you to regurgitate code. I know with my students, I ask them all the time, and they're here now so they can vouch for it. What is the business use case? What is the stakeholder? How are we critically thinking to solve this problem? Do we need to sprinkle on AI? This isn't Salt Bay. We're not sprinkling AI on every case, okay? We're only sprinkling AI when it makes logical business sense because it's expensive to deploy, right? So can I just sprinkle on an Excel sheet or a t-test? And my students do that, right? So those skills that we're still teaching you in Flatiron is going to help you use AI more responsibly. And even before then, ask yourself, is it even necessary for this use case, right? And think about what's not in your data as much as what's in your data. Just because you don't have race or gender in your data set does not mean that the model is not picking up on a confounding variable to discriminate against race and gender. Right? So you really have to know how to search inside of things and know these models' performance. So that's how we can combat that. So real quickly, in under 60 seconds, if you can, Oli, tell us your view on ethics before we open it up.
Yeah. Quickly, one of the first things that I like to think about with regards to this is that frequently when a new technology is released, there's a huge amount of noise around, okay, what are the ethics? What are the legislation? What is the regulation relating to this new tool? A tool is created by a group of humans and is used by a group of humans. So the ethics, the philosophy, the regulation is does not necessarily need to be applied at a tool level and should instead be, okay, what is the people who are using this? What are the people who are creating this? And Jelly talks about something that I think is super important, which is that as these tools progress, they become expensive. And so that means that these tools are only available to people with money. And if tools are only available to people with money, the people who make money off them get to use them, and the people who don't make money of them don't get to use them. Additionally, so like close to the data set that was being discussed as being biased. So there's a percentage of the internet or percentage of our population that just don't use the internet. Like there are people who just aren't on the internet. They do not get included in this set. Data that has been collected in the past through systems that are already created in a system of systemic racism or bigotry or intolerance, that data is already flawed and is being used to build these tools already. So even if you didn't necessarily assume that a new model was created, hopefully, or needing to be created, hopefully that we build new models using better data and not just rely on the data that has been collected from the 80s and later, or what, the 2000s and later. And then close to this is just the discussion that when you use tools or build tools, it's important to think of how they might be misused, who is giving the money to create those tools or use those tools, who are the clients of the people that are building those tools. and what might be the reasons why that's beneficial. NVIDIA obviously made a bunch of money. Are they selling their AI tool to like some company that's, doing something nefarious, or to an organization that's doing something nefarious? We've seen stuff like that relating to like AWS and Microsoft with like those tools supporting government organizations that people may not be a fan of or believe are discriminatory. And so it's important to just follow the money and also not believe that this is an AI issue necessarily. This is, okay, do the people who have access and the capacity to ongoing use these, use them in a way that we believe is ethical and equitable to the population at large, and what can we do about that? Or can we do anything? We can't put this back in Pandora's box, and these people aren't going to necessarily regulate themselves. So that's not 60 seconds, Jelly, but
Oh no, you're fine, Ali. Yeah, I think ethics is very important, and understanding using things responsibly is also very important. So now I'm going to pass it over to Chelsea to open up the Q&A. And I know that the panelists, when we get multiple questions coming in, let's try to keep it 30 seconds or under so we can answer as many questions as possible. So Chelsea, I'm passing it back over to you.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you to all three of you all for your insightful answers. Definitely leaving people things to think of and ponder. So is there anyone who has any questions so far, feel free to also raise your hand in the chat with the raise hand feature. If you have a question that's maybe a little bit longer, you don't want to type out. There's a small group of us here, so we can definitely popcorn style it. So if there are any questions, feel free to come off mute or raise your hand. And Yesenia and I will be scoping through the Zoom to see if there are any participants that would like to ask.
And until we get a question or two, I guess everybody wants to hear me sing. Y'all want to hear me sing? Do it. So I would just do a quick plug about some ways that you can learn more about AI. I know in the enterprise side, Flatiron has its own initiatives of courses that they're going to roll out. But as a student or even an employee here at Flatiron, there are tons of resources on LinkedIn, especially. Type in AI webinars and conferences, and you're going to get 5,000 to pop up. So that is also good resources. We're also going to share a resource link at the end about some podcasts and our articles that we also have found informative in AI. I will say I've probably been to like 15 conferences this year about Gen AI, because I like to have the controversy around it too. I like to know the pros, the cons, the good, the bad, the bitter, the sweet, the salt, the pepper. So you can always interact with me as well on LinkedIn or Discord to ask any questions. But I want to hear some questions because we like to talk. So any questions, comments, concerns, or opinions that you want from us around generative AI, AI, machine learning, job security, anything. We're here to answer it all.
Hey guys, this is Lindsay from Flatiron. Thanks for sharing all of your input and insights on this very interesting topic. I'm curious to get anybody's thoughts on citing your source. So as people begin to use AI, we already see a number of people using it to post content. So we're going to see more of that. We're going to essentially see this content deluge, right? Just tons and tons of content coming at us and not knowing, is it, made by this person or not? Never mind, is it true or false? Any ideas as to citing those sources? This is AI generated, not what are your thoughts on that?
That's such a good question. Wow. I'd very, very contemporary. If my fellow panelists don't mind, I'd love to jump into that. Yeah, because that's obviously something we see super, especially with the growth of GPT and even just other generative technology. It's becoming far more pertinent. I know, I talk a lot with many of my peers who work in, middle schools and high schools and colleges and stuff like that in the writing space, in any type of like creative artistry spaces and stuff like that. And the idea of citing resources, the idea of creating references to, you know, prior work and stuff like that is really tricky with, you know, these basically like batched soup type of technologies where you don't really know what the initial ingredients are. You're just kind of getting the resultant filter. But I think there are interesting ways to work around that. I know one practice I've seen from one of my peers who works in university is they actually encourage the use of ChatGPT, not for providing directed sources of information. You know, not directly a primary or secondary source, but to provide like additional context and stuff like that, given some other source material. And so they'll like almost craft, in this case, it's a little more of like a collegiate essayist environment. So not quite indicative of, you know, research reports and stuff like that, or articles you see online, but in that way, they're trying to combat the essence of, hey, how do you actually tell what the, you know, what the contributing source is for something you read online? At least from a student perspective, they're trying to drill the behaviors of like, well, we can't necessarily tell if something generated by GPT is actually true. So don't use them for generating a direct fact or something like that. Use them to reference if there's any additional, like, hey, GPT, I just read this article about generative AI. Can you tell me a little bit more about it? Or can you provide a counter resource or a, you know, something else? And I think in some cases you actually can. Another practice I've seen is you actually can ask GPT and other generative AI tools to recommend resources for specific like learning purposes and stuff like that. It's not always accurate, but I found that to be an interesting kind of navigational quirk when it comes to those resources. Like, hey, can I get some books for learning more about how to code, right? So admittedly, it's still in a very early stage, and I think when it comes to, you know, the, like you mentioned, the deluge of a lot more generative writing, you know, written tools and literature out there, it is much trickier. But I think what's important is just encouraging good practice, because even just, you know, before GPT, plenty of examples of tools in the past where I think probably the easiest one is how often we've seen, either as instructors or students or parents or anything like that, students citing Wikipedia or students citing other, you know, resources that are kind of collaborative or don't really have direct links to primary resources and stuff like that, but are kind of just like bubbling to the top, if that makes sense. So I think this is kind of like an extension of that in a sense. And we just kind of have to encourage good behaviors in terms of both industry as well as, you know, student practice.
Yeah. And so Lindsay, I think my 2 cents to kind of be brief in my response, because we can go on and on about this because it's a good concern, right? If you're deploying a model, there's still copyright issues. Okay. So for instance, company Y as a financial institution cannot just deploy a model that was created by ChatGPT only, right? They still need programmers to go in on the back end, tune the model, show how they tuned it, show how they have tests for accuracy, shown how they have tests for bias, because these models are black box. They're very neural net, right? So you can't just deploy out of a box in an industry serving setting, such as healthcare, finance, or anything like that, a model from ChatGPT. Now, as far as using it for creative purposes, the same thing goes, right? So even if it spits out a logo for your favorite company, you still have to go on the back end, change the filter on it, flip it around a little bit, change the hue of the color, and then you can say that it's your logo. Okay. So out of the gate, these things are not reputable to, like you said, market and give credit for, right? There has to be some type of building that you have done on top of the output before you're able to put it in a portfolio as a logo, before you're able to deploy the model, things of that nature. In academic settings, as far as making, like I said, my Disney World itinerary, I'm not gonna, you get what I'm saying, cite it on LinkedIn. As far as for students, students can have critical thinking when they use ChatGPT. So they can decipher the wrong output and the right output, because they'll start to understand really quickly when ChatGPT is kind of steering them. So if you really want to check a student's critical thinking in an academic setting, there is a way that you still can utilize ChatGPT and still encourage them to give credit that that's how they came about that this answer was wrong. But yes, those are ways that we can do as far as giving credit and things of that nature. That's my 2 cents about that. Great question.
I wanted to bring up one thing that I think is related to that is 2 things that I don't know if we've discussed in this space of this question are, this is going to involve like a lot of trust. And so like I was listening to a podcast and Adobe was like one of the people who was on this podcast, and part of what they are doing with any of the AI products that are created from their resources is that they are transparent right out the bat. It's like already embedded in the like image that is created to say, yes, this was created with the use of AI. And so the hope would be that more and more people would do that to say, yes, I created this with the help of AI. And so that is like a useful thing. I think something else that I find like really intriguing about this is that like the FTC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the Department of Justice, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau have already like released a joint statement to say that like AI algorithms that are shown to be discriminatory or biased in a way that is like negatively impacting people are illegal. And that is not necessarily an AI thing. It is that like you can't create systems that are biased against Americans. And so they've already said like people can be sued for that. And I think Jelly brings up a really useful point of like, the hope is that people do not use biased algorithms in the tools that they build. Now, the real question I think becomes like, what is the actual enforcement of that law? And like, how quickly can someone skirt around it to their own benefit? And then like the cost of business is the minimal fine after the fact. Lastly, I think something that I at least have seen a lot of, not in coding necessarily, because there's more of like, I'm stealing your code, like I'm fine with that. But in like college settings, you see instructors who are going and saying, oh, it looks like you like I used like a GPT checker and your entire essay is like a GPT written essay. And that means like they get plagiarism, they might get kicked out of school. Those are like real world consequences for someone. And so like, how do you reinforce to say, oh, I didn't actually write this with ChatGPT. So like provide your other sources or like the video of you writing it or like the article comments as you work through Google Docs. But then I've also seen stuff like someone put the Declaration of Independence into GPT-0 and it came back that it was like AI generated. So you're like, okay, these are laughably like not going to be great tools to like rely on. Yeah, those are a couple other points that I don't know if had been mentioned.
Thank you so much for sharing. So we want to close out the event. Again, thank you to Jelly, Cash, and Oli for joining us for this hour and sharing your expertise. It was greatly appreciated. We hope that everyone on the call left with a little bit more knowledge than they had when they joined, or reinforce some ideas that they had. We definitely want to encourage folks to keep this conversation going. I have shared the resource sheet that our instructors came up with, but if you ever have any more questions, feel free to reach out to the folks that were on this call. Remember to keep conversations like these going. Bring them to your friends, to your peers, to your parents, even if they have no idea what this is. If you have parents like mine, they're just going to say iRobot. So you can lessen everyone's fears with the information that you've gotten today. And we hope that you all have an amazing rest of your day and good luck with whatever part of the program you are currently in.
Bye, y'all.
Thanks for having us, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.